Seminário Internacional A-CDM. Solicitamos a todos que ocupem seus lugares para darmos prosseguimento a este evento.
Referência mundial, o Departamento de Controle do Espaço Aéreo ocupa lugar de destaque no cenário da aviação. Softwares e consoles de última geração, profissionais altamente capacitados e priorização de pesquisas em tecnologia fazem com que o Brasil esteja sintonizado com o que há de mais moderno no mundo no que diz respeito a controle de tráfego aéreo. As contínuas modernizações e transformações na prestação dos serviços de tráfego aéreo proporcionadas pelo DSEA levaram à implementação dos serviços à distância. Dia 18 de outubro de 2019. Este será mais um marco na história do controle do espaço aéreo brasileiro. Neste dia, entrará em operação em Santa Cruz, no Rio de Janeiro, a primeira torre de controle remota do hemisfério sul. Câmeras de visualização instaladas no aeródromo permitem a substituição da visualização realizada pelos controladores em uma torre de controle convencional. As imagens das aeronaves em voo, das pistas de pouso e taxiamento, das áreas de manobra, estacionamento de aeronaves, e de outras áreas do aeródromo necessárias ao controle de todo serão geradas em tempo real por essas câmeras e serão visualizadas em monitores ou telas de alta definição instaladas no ambiente operacional à distância. Manter o nível de segurança do tráfego aéreo, a confiabilidade, a qualidade dos serviços e a presteza no atendimento aos usuários do espaço aéreo é a nossa missão. Para o DSEA, o futuro é o nosso presente.
Senhoras e senhores, solicitamos que ocupem seus lugares para darmos prosseguimento ao seminário que está acontecendo aqui neste local. Solicitamos que os senhores ocupem os seus lugares para darmos prosseguimento ao ciclo de palestras.
Airspace and airports limited capacity requirement in order to make the aviation flow. JNES offers simplicity, agility, and efficiency. Pilots, airlines, and general aviation filling up and submitting flight plans. LEO centralizes flight plan information, assuring consistency and on-time distribution. Sagittario, connected to all available sensors and communication infrastructure, provides real-time air situation and decision-making tools needed by the air traffic controllers to manage the airspace under their responsibility. Platel is the complete platform for training air traffic controllers in several and different scenarios conditions. Cosmos provides flight information services for remote aerodromes, integrating flight information anywhere the aviation is. Aquila, responsible for sharing information with overseas navigation services providers, harmonizing the navigation services around the world. Cygnus connects all the aviation to a robust network, ensuring reliable communication. Aura provides up-to-date meteorological information database for safe flight planning. A-Tech provides comprehensive support services related to all Magna products, including training programs at the deployed systems or at your own lab. International support services include local or remote options for status monitoring and maintenance activities. Macro, sky under control.
Neste momento, convidamos ao palco o senhor Christopher Dodson, integrante da Associação Internacional de Transportes Aéreos IATA, secretário do Grupo de Coordenação A-CDM das Empresas Aéreas, que trará os detalhes de implementação e integração do A-CDM entre os diversos participantes operacionais.
O senhor Chris Dodson possui MBA pela Universidade da Califórnia do Sul, trabalhou no desenvolvimento de software de planejamento, agendamento e despacho de voo pela Gulfstream Aerospace. Atuou como consultor da British Airways por 15 anos, desenvolveu a evolução do portfólio de aplicativos operacionais, incluindo o desenvolvimento de um hub de mensagens nos aeroportos de Heathrow, Gatwick, Manchester, Edinburgh, Birmingham e JFK. Atuou em outros projetos, incluindo o desenvolvimento do dashboard operacional, conversão do AFPN para protocolos de internet do NATS, migração DCS e assistência IATA no desenvolvimento do padrão AIDX para comunicação de dados operacionais de voo. O Sr. Chris tem vasta experiência em A-CDM, tendo participado da implementação e desenvolvimento da atividade em grandes aeroportos como Heathrow e Gatwick, além de ter atuado como membro representante da IATA na padronização global do A-CDM em parceria com o Eurocontrol. Sr. Chris Dodson.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've said it before, but this meeting reminds me of a meeting that we had a couple of years ago in Hong Kong. And that was really at the start of the big push for A-CDM in Asia Pacific. So I think, and I hope, there are a lot of similarities with what happens today and what happened there, in that CDM really took off like a wildfire in the subsequent 2 years. But I do know there is going to be a slight difference here, at least I expect there will be, and that's that in Hong Kong, after the seminar, we had a meal. And at the meal, we were presented with 2 goose feet on a plate. And I was instructed by the lady who managed Hong Kong International Airport that I really should eat these 2 goose feet. And so I crunched my way through 2 goose feet, and there's not really much there, you know, there's some skin and it crunches a lot. So I said to her, why are we doing this? And she said, look at my skin. Does it glow? It's the collagen. So that was a mystery solved. But anyway, back to business. So, the presentation is called Implementation and Integration of A-CDM. I have the clicker. So, what I want to talk about today, I'm going to start out with a very brief sort of context-setting statement, and then look at a little bit about how A-CDM is evolving. Then I'm the secretary of the AACG group, so I want to tell you a little bit about that. And I'd like to tell you about the implementation activities that AACG is involved with. And beyond AACG, within IATA, there are quite a few programs also relating to A-CDM implementation, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Then delve into some of the recommendations that the AACG group has made. And then also look at what's happening in the global picture with ICAO. And then look at a couple of cases of A-CDM implementation. So one at Heathrow and one at Gatwick. So I was personally involved on the sort of cold face of those implementations, actually doing the work while I was still employed with British Airways. And then some takeaway points from the two implementations. So context, I'm going to pick up the mic for this one. Hello? I'm there. So a couple of press statements. The first one, and I'm going to read it. Globally, airports and airspace are becoming a bit busier, both for traditional traffic flows and also for emerging networks with recent capacity-constrained airports. So our esteemed chairman of our group, who's from British Airways and is probably much involved in getting the planes back on track for the day after tomorrow and to get Dave home. But anyway, his comment was, and this was put at the front of the IATA recommendation papers, the current situation is not sustainable without incurring increased flight delays unless action is taken. An improved data coordination between all airport stakeholders, providing clear, accurate and transparent information as should be delivered by A-CDM is essential. So he made that statement. He made that statement in January 2018. And so that was this is where we are now. And shortly after that, later in the year, there was a press release stating the number of people traveling by air should double to 8.2 billion by 2037, with Asia and the Pacific leading the way, Sector Federation IATA forecast. And Alexandre de Juniac, who is the chief executive of IATA, says aviation is growing, generating huge benefits for the world. The doubling of air passengers in the next 20 years could support 100 million jobs globally. So there's where we are now, and there's where we're going. And Ian's statement indicates that A-CDM is really a key component of how we're going to deal with the current situation and how we're going to move forward. And I think that most of the A-CDM airports that have implemented, if you said to them, well, we're going to take it away from you, they would just, they just wouldn't be able to cope. I mean, it is a success. So looking a little bit about A-CDM evolution and how it's growing. The airports globally are experiencing the same sort of choke points. And they're looking at implementing A-CDM to achieve a step change. And you might ask, well, what's the choke point? You know, why should I, and when should I implement A-CDM? And to take it really from the recommendations that IATA made, if you see a number of things happening, so for example, inefficiency at the airport due to non-optimized turnaround and sequencing performance, well, that's an indicator that A-CDM might help. Poor punctuality and performance, such as airport start delays. Poor compliance to EOBT, to the estimated off-clock time, and non-compliance with ICAO filed flight plans. Lack of transparency on the overall airport plan, or lack of a single version of the truth. So nobody's quite sure what's happening in the airport. First come, first served principles, which specifically lead to poor sequencing, and that's going to adversely impact the airport throughput. Poor data into the network, where that's available, where it results in higher regulation, and that'll impact the airport. Poor recovery after disruption, and startup delays due to false demand. And finally, poor interface and handling agents. Poor interfaces with handling agents, where airlines do not have access to real-time systems on turnaround and delay stages. So all of those are similar sort of pinch points that are being seen all over the world. So what have we got? So we've got 28 implementations so far in Europe, and that's growing. And I see reports that it's heading towards 50. So a significant increase. Europe does have a network manager, so that's a benefit in Europe. In Asia Pacific, there are currently 18 implementations of one sort or another. And as Dave said, the Chinese implementations aren't really European A-CDM. But as I'll explain in a bit, we're working hard on that. We're trying to standardize and bring them into the fold. So heading towards 75, and it's all going pretty quickly. And that's really, it's exciting to see. And then in other areas, by the way, I should say that Asia Pacific also includes Australasia. That's included in those figures. And in other areas, well, here we are in Brazil, so Latin America, Canada, the Middle East. So plans are evolving steadily. And of course, the most replicated model is the European version. So it's very much looking like a global phenomenon. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the ACG group. It's the group that I'm secretary of. So tasked with guiding the rollout of A-CDM, addresses airlines' difficulties with unharmonized processes and procedures in A-CDM implementations. So we got formed in December 2015, and there are 11 aircraft representatives. We meet twice a year. And if you look at that date, so that's 2015, so that's substantially after the time that A-CDM was initiated. And so the dust had settled somewhat on A-CDM implementations. So as representatives of the aircraft operators, We had time to think about what was going on, how well it was working, what wasn't, where the improvements could be, and hence the formation of the group. So what are we trying to do? So we've got to try and harmonize the rules and the processes globally, developing policy and strategies to do that. Because clearly, if you're an airline operating a network of flights throughout the globe, and A-CDM implementations are growing, you don't want to have different ones at each airport. You want to have an A-CDM that you can understand, and an A-CDM that isn't going to confuse your pilot. So another goal is to reduce the complexity from the business and deliver efficiency and delay reduction. And we've got to make sure that A-CDM works for airlines, airports, and the network. And we really want to provide a single voice to try and lead and collaborate, drive education and transparency among A-CDM partners. So what have we been doing? So we published recommendation papers in 2017. So these are, in addition to the European A-CDM manual, which is an extremely helpful and detailed document, we've developed some sort of implementation tips and guides from the AO perspective. We've also been working with Eurocontrol in what was called the Harmonization Task Force from 2017. So once the A-CDM implementations, or once a substantial amount of them had taken place in Europe, AOs did discover various discrepancies between the ways that the implementations had gone. And sometimes these were related to systems that were in use. Sometimes they might be just a misunderstanding of how the process should work. All kinds of reasons. But Eurocontrol was extremely helpful in putting together a forum to make sure that we identified what these issues might be and that we worked on trying to harmonize them and to make sure that as AOs, when we went from one airport to the next, we didn't have a completely different culture and environment to deal with. So ICAO picked up on these recommendations, and they were looking at what they were going to do about the breadth of implementations of A-CDM in Asia Pacific, because they felt that a lot of Asia Pacific countries had gone over to Europe and they'd looked at European systems and they'd been to European airports. They'd studied the Eurocontrol A-CDM manual, but there needed to be a little bit more because Asia Pacific was not Europe. It was a little bit more diverse. The situation was different. There wasn't a network manager. So they needed something different. So we've been working with them, and the implementation plan for Asia Pacific was published in June 2019, so just a short while ago. So otherwise, we review and we assist with implementation plans. So we get sent implementation plans by various airports, and they say, does this look good? Is there anything wrong here? Are we doing things correctly? So we've done quite a bit of work in that area. And then finally, because A-CDM is growing on the global scale, it's way too much for a small group to manage. So we're revising the structure within IATA to create regional task forces to look at A-CDM implementations, which would be guided by the core group. So we're starting with a European one, which is really a follow-on of work we've been doing already. Then we're going to have one in Asia Pacific, and hopefully, as things progress, we will spread further. So I'm going to talk about some additional IATA work that's going on for A-CDM. But first of all, I'd like to give a quick, play a quick video. It was given to us by Avanor, who are involved at Oslo Airport. So if you could please play the video, thank you.
Turnaround at Oslo. Turnaround at Oslo Airport is a complex process involving collaboration between many airport operators. CDM, collaborative decision-making, helps us to reduce delays and increase predictability. We can avoid delays by collaborating and sharing information when problems occur. Unpredictable events can lead to significant delays if there is no warning. In this example, a passenger starts to feel ill while boarding. The flight attendant calls for help and it's decided that the passenger cannot fly today. All the baggage has already been loaded, but this passenger's baggage needs to be removed from the plane. This will lead to delays. When the target off-block time is not updated in time, this can have consequences for many other flights. An incoming flight may arrive at an occupied gate and end up blocking the path of other planes, and additional flights will be delayed. Once notice of a late gate change finally arrives, the crew and equipment have to be moved. This leads to further delays for the arriving flight. In a peak period, a TOBT update that comes too late and a lack of communication will lead to delays that impact other airports and continue throughout the whole day. This can be avoided by an early warning and an efficient information flow. The flight attendant is the first to notice the problem and informs the gate manager that the passenger needs to get off the plane and their baggage unloaded. The gate manager notifies the operations center. The operations center updates the TOBT. The air traffic control tower produces new departure times and stand allocation updates the gate plan. The arriving plane will be notified in good time, and everyone will be able to adapt to the new situation. The crew and equipment will be ready at the new gate. When problems occur, we can avoid significant delays by notifying the appropriate parties as soon as possible. It may be you who first discovers the problem. Delays can be avoided when we work together and share information.
So hopefully a short but interesting video. And if you noticed at the start of the video, there were all the apron services corralled around the aircraft performing the turnaround activities. So that's an area where there's quite a lot of excitement at the moment. There's a lot of technology being applied to that operation and how to improve it. There are traditional vendors that have been selling systems to manage a lot of asset allocation, resource allocation systems. And now there's a lot of AI starting to be involved. There's video monitoring of activities, so you can tell when a process, you can tell when the cleaners went on board and when the cleaners came off. And there's a lot of IT being pushed in that direction. And Heathrow Airport, for example, has hired McLaren because they see the turnaround rather like a pit stop in a Formula One Grand Prix, or that's where it should get to. It's not there now, but that's where they want it to go. So from IATA's perspective, this is all good stuff, but there needs to be a way of communicating all this information to the hub that is looking after the turnaround. Because at the moment, there are quite a lot of vendors that they know one aspect, they know, let's say, cargo loading extremely well, but they don't know the catering aspect. And so if you happen to buy one system for one apron activity and another for a different one, you've got to coordinate them all. So we're developing standard messaging to try and support that operation, to bring together all of this information and really try and make the turnaround more like an F1 pit stop. Additionally, there's work going on with integrating the passenger trajectory into the turnaround, because it's essential really that you know where your passengers are and how likely their tardiness is going to impact your departure, or whether you need to just depart without them. So there are a couple of programs. There's Ramp of the Future, which is looking at how to coordinate all this data. And there is NEXTT, which is really looking at the longer term future, because that doubling of passenger numbers is going to have a serious impact on airports globally. And then we have the Global Airport and Passenger Symposium, which happens once a year. This will be the second one. It's in October in Warsaw in Poland. And there's a lot of brainstorming that goes on in that particular forum, where we look at completely new ways of managing the airport and the turnaround. And then the disruptors are coming. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of Silicon Valley money poured into our sector, because Uber Elevate, or Uber Flights as they sometimes call themselves, are going to be operating vertical takeoff and landing taxi services. So there's going to be a lot of IT, and that will likely blend with some of what's going on in commercial aviation today. So looking at the A-CDM, sorry, the AACG recommendations, and so I'll give you the list of topics that we've addressed. So we've looked at when to implement A-CDM, the actual process of A-CDM implementation, and what the roles and responsibilities should generally be in an implementation. The stakeholder access to A-CDM data, how to achieve an effective and efficient turnaround process, how to build a continuous improvement culture, very important. A-CDM doesn't stop when the program is implemented. It carries on. The environment changes, the world changes around us. Standardization of A-CDM procedures, another hot topic for the airline operator. Common objectives and performance metrics, so how do we evaluate how things are going? And last but by no means least, standard documentation for pilots. So A-CDM is great, it delivers huge benefits, but if the pilots get confused and don't know what to do when they're at an airport, then it's all for not nothing, but it doesn't go very well. So we have a pilot from Air Singapore, and he's developed a standard text to explain A-CDM at any airport. And he challenges any airport that can't make this work to tell him why, so that as a pilot he can fly anywhere. And okay, there are regional variations, but they're quite small. So it's a very interesting concept, and he hasn't anybody come with him with a reason why his proposal doesn't work. So that's an interesting one to look at. So these recommendations, I mean, there are quite a lot of words, but we've tried to organize it in a way that it's really just not a blizzard of words. So we've tried to organize it in a very structured way. So for each of the topics, it's, you know, what's the situation, what's the recommendation, and what are the key considerations in implementing the recommendation. And so I'm going to take you through a couple of them, a précis of really what they contain. So here's the first one, A-CDM implementation itself. So we state, without clear and agreed objectives across all key stakeholders, A-CDM implementations may not yield assumed benefits. And I think that echoes what Dave has said in his presentation as well. So what are the key enablers for success in this situation? So cultural change and behavioral change, do not underestimate the human element of A-CDM. Yes, the IT is extremely valuable and extremely helpful, but it is the cultural change that's the big one. Ensure the considerations of airlines and airport priorities with agreed objectives, trade-offs, and measurements of performance. So everybody has different goals, you know. Each stakeholder is working to a different set of incentives. So when everybody comes together, that really has to all come out on the table. And everybody has to agree, because it's for the greater good. Then there needs to be an airport steering group to agree processes and targets with the airport. There again, everybody has to sit down around the table, different stakeholders from different areas. There are going to be objectives, and there's got to be a little bit of give and take between the stakeholders to get the job done. A framework of reviews to track progress. Another very important aspect. How's it going? How are we reviewing it? How are we measuring it? And then there's got to be a continuous improvement of systems and processes. And you'll see the extent of that later on in the presentation. Roles and responsibilities. Sorry, this is a busy one. Stakeholder roles and responsibilities may vary between A-CDM implementations due to local requirements of an airport. Differences from the norm should be documented with reasons and not contribute to any reduction in performance. So what are the key considerations? So TOBT, a critical component, it's actually owned by the airline. It's something the airline should set. It's got to be accurate and timely, and its update is extremely important. Now, having said that it's owned by the airline, once an A-CD implementation has taken place, it dawns on people pretty quickly that actually we can estimate a TOBT on behalf of the airline. And a lot of people are doing this, a lot of airports are doing this. In Asia Pacific, they're big fans of doing this. But what we've said as IATA is, well, fair enough. That gives you predictability, gives you a heads up on what's going to happen. But please don't publish that to flow management before we've had a time to give our own version of where we think we are. Because as airlines, there are lots of things we can do to try and make up time. So if you're basing your automated target off-block time on what you estimate our landing and our taxi in and our minimum turnaround time to be, well, that might not be right. And we should have the opportunity to change it and set it. The policy for the alignment of TOBT and EOBT. So the target off-block time and the departure time in the flight plan must be made clear. And this is a very hot topic in Europe, so something I encourage you to make clear. VTT should be reviewed frequently. A lot of times you'll get variable taxi times that aren't dynamic. I mean, it's encouraged for it to be completely dynamic, looking at what's really happening today, not what's happening a month ago. So that takes some data collection and some analysis and quite a bit of work. A pre-departure sequencer that's fit for purpose is of paramount importance, whether it's the responsibility of the airport alone or the airport in collaboration with ATC provider. And all stakeholders should be satisfied that the sequencer delivers performance, stability, and equity. And that's what our chairman calls the holy trinity of A-CDM. These things are extremely important. Also, the responsibility for when the pilot is to call for startup must be clear and published in relevant documentation. So on to the next one. Effective and efficient turnaround process. So prior to A-CDM implementations, the process might not involve the same level of structured interaction between stakeholders, so a standardized approach should be introduced. So everybody's got to understand the importance of TOBT, particularly the AOs. The pre-departure sequencer algorithm, it's got to deliver transparency, efficiency, and stability. VTT, reviewed frequently. And then, if possible, a standard A-CDM API to the resource allocation optimizers. So this is what I was discussing as one of the areas that IATA is now working in. So the fuelers, the caterers, the cleaners, the cargo loading, the baggage loading, the crew, passenger busing, aircraft movement, they all contribute to the TOBT calculation. So at the moment with A-CDM, there is the start of ground operations milestone, and then we have the aircraft ready milestone. So that gap between those two milestones is an area that still requires a lot of work. So I'd mentioned IATA's been working with ICAO on the implementation plan for Asia Pacific. What I can't say about this plan is whether it's going to be used in other areas. I believe it is going to be, because I don't think it's something that just applies to Asia Pacific. I think it's a model that they could use in other areas. So it may well come to your area, to your region. But the recommendations that IATA has made are from the perspective of an aircraft operator. So for ICAO to develop something, clearly it has to be from not just the aircraft operator perspective, but they took the basis of what IATA had done in the AACG group had done, and we worked for days and days on this in conjunction with ANSPs in the region and with a lot of input from CANSO and reviews from the entire community of airports and ANSPs and aircraft operators in the region to develop a framework document for an implementation plan. So it also ties into ICAO's other work with their ASBUs and their block process, and also discusses options for integration with flow control in the absence of a European-style network manager. So there are a number of competing concepts. I think it's safe to say the leading one is called multinodal, which is effectively a distributed database of flow data. So it can be accessed from all nations that are that need that data in the region. And there's been substantial amount of work on the FIXIM message, or the FIXIM model, to support A-CDM in that way. So I think it's something to watch very seriously about how that's going, because there are some maturing A-CDM implementations in Asia Pacific, and they are all now looking to flow control to network enable A-CDM implementations. Oops. So now on to a couple of cases that I was directly involved with. First one was Heathrow, the second one was Gatwick. They both came out of what was called the British Airports Authority. So there was some political intervention, shall we say, into the airport market. And BA was broken up. And so investment decisions had been quite difficult because of the politics. So anyway, we were when we were, when we started this implementation. And at the time I was working with British Airways. So what did the plan look like? Well, the airport was considered the natural owner of the implementation, with ATC running the pre-departure sequencer. So, as I said, there were some political difficulties, and the lack of investment in IT meant that we needed to do quite a lot of work with ATC. And we found ourselves in a position where the airport couldn't deliver the data to the AOs. So we had to do a workaround, and we all knew that everybody had AFTN. So we asked NATS whether they could develop a new kind of AFTN message that would just push A-CDM data around. So that was quite a task, and on top of that, the AFTN network had been working on a very old IBM protocol called SNA. And I don't want to bore you with the details of that, but I'll just tell you it was extremely expensive and not that reliable. And so we wanted to convert it to IP protocol, Internet protocol. So that was a sort of preliminary, if you will, to the Heathrow implementation. So it was pretty complicated. The other issue that we as an airline had with Heathrow's plan was that they were proposing a non-standard interface between the airport A-CDM information platform and hub carriers and anybody else. So that may be fine at Heathrow, but when you're an airline looking at the global picture, you don't want to have to implement dozens of different interfaces to dozens of different airports. You want a common way of doing it. And we failed. We failed to get them to standardize, but they want to do it. I know they want to do it. And I know that they will do it in the end. The thing that we really liked was we were shown the way the departure sequencer, pre-departure sequencer worked, how it was built, how it was designed, and how flexible it was. And we were all expecting that there was going to be quite a bit of argument around the pre-departure sequencer to make it equitable for everybody. And we also saw the plan for the actual A-CDM portal at Heathrow, and that was extremely good as well. And it really gave everybody a complete understanding of how the airport was operating. So you could see anybody's flight departing from any stand. You could see the order of flow from all the aprons to the start of the runway. So if anything seemed out of order, if we felt that Lufthansa was being favored because look at what happened with this particular taxi out, we could raise it and they could investigate, they could see whether there was anything wrong, and it could be changed, and changed very easily. The other thing that was significant was there was no real hard implementation deadline set. There was a proposal to have a series of trials, initially outside of busy periods, but as we got closer to going live, we introduced trials in busy periods to battle test what was going on. And then the steering group too, that was a part of the plan that we very much agreed with. It comprised all stakeholders and established for regular meetings. So then if we look at the progression, what then happened? So we had the plan. So what really went on? So initially, the trials went well, and we went live, and then there were some issues with handling disruptive events, and everybody panicked a bit, and I think this is probably natural. There's a panic with and without A-CDM in place. And initially, people were concerned about the system. Was it working? Was it doing what it was supposed to do? And so it was switched off for a while during disruptive periods. And that became complicated too, because how do you tell everybody, well, actually, at the moment we are running A-CDM, and then at the next moment we're not, and now we're actually running it again. So we developed a system of communication to make sure that everybody was on the same page and everybody knew what to do. Then another strange thing happened, which happened really just under stress. It turned out there were a huge number of systems daisy-chained in the processing of a TOBT for it to go around the patch, to then get to the pre-departure sequencer, to deliver a new TSAT, and to then be delivered back to the AO. And nobody quite knew where the problem was. And so there was some robust conversations between the airport and the AOs. Whose problem really was this? And we had to dig and dig and dig. And it turned out that in the messaging systems, there were a lot of pauses. So there was well, I'm going to wait for 3 seconds and see where there's a message. And, oh, now I've got one. Now I'm going to send it to the next system along the line. And when you added all those up, it came to a very big delay. So we then had to go into each of them, and we had to trim and trim and trim and trim until the time, till it became, everybody was satisfied that we knew that loop where you set your TOBT, you get a new TSAT, you know what you're doing. That was almost instant, and then everybody could move on. And then another strange thing happened. Suddenly, there was always a plan to move the pre-departure sequencer to a cloud system, or a virtual system as it was called at the time. Now they're called cloud systems. And everything had been fine with the pre-departure sequencer. It was performing, it did enough, it was timely enough, and then suddenly things slowed down. And this is one of the sort of crazy things that can hit a project that you can't possibly imagine. It turned out that the pre-departure system was running on the same server as a game for the iPhone that became extremely popular. And suddenly the resource was taken away from the pre-departure sequencer to some sort of game. So that was quickly sorted out. So the flexible PDS platform was proving very valuable, and many changes were made. The stakeholders all kept very much engaged with the steering group to resolve problems. And as was expected, the computer platform sharing all the A-CDM data was giving fantastic visibility on the performance, and there was a lot of feedback provided by all stakeholders. So where are we now with Heathrow? So believe it or not, there have been 180, at least 180 releases of the pre-departure sequencer since the A-CDM implementation went live. And that's resulted in a pretty robust and stable platform. And issues still arise, you know, things change, schedules change. So as they arise, they're tracked and they're worked through the system through to completion. And the culture of the steering group is kept very collaborative. The performance of stakeholders is discussed openly in meetings. They do have a grading system for how well you're doing. But the airport doesn't beat up, shall I say, on individuals that are performing poorly, because they want to help. They want to help those individuals, not punish them. So they work with them to say, well, what can we do? How can we help? Because it's for the benefit of all of us. So stakeholders are kept actively engaged in the steering group to resolve the problems. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip quickly. So the Gatwick implementation plan in 2015, so a few years later, same again, airport was the natural owner, didn't know that much about the pre-departure sequencer, and ATC was migrating from NATS to ANS. So that was likely to be a challenge. But they presented a dream IT plan. So it was all standards-based interfaces. It was they were using the IATA standard for communicating, which we were very excited about. It was all open source messaging, which is very good. We'd all been wanting to use it. And it was all going to be done in the cloud. So it couldn't have looked like a more fantastic plan from an AO perspective. And the initial goal was set for 6 months, so that seemed pretty quick. But we had a good steering group, all the stakeholders there, very well organized, all looking great. So then what happened? Oops. Initially, we had problems. So we thought the IT was going to be, you know, the easy part of it. The security model on the cloud just didn't work. So we had to change it. So that delayed the entire project. Then the integration with the legacy AODB, so the old systems that had been in place at the airport with the new cloud technology, took a lot more work than expected. But once the security and the AODB issues were resolved, the standards-based approach meant that the integration with the stakeholders went extremely fast. But unfortunately, because the project was now taking a lot longer than had been expected, some of the team had been hired on fixed contracts. And so the expertise started to disperse before the implementation went live. So we experienced a lack of experience. Everything got stretched. Steering group meetings tailed off. And there was a reduced team struggling to deliver the live implementation with the project time doubling. So where are we now with Gatwick? So the implementation is still in place, providing local efficiencies. There's still scope for more. They've been removed from the network at the moment, but they're planning to engage back with NM perhaps late 2019 or early 2020. We're advising that procedural awareness training have got to be kept current and kept going. And the procedural group meetings got to continue on a consistent basis. Got to stress test the pre-departure sequencer and HMI, the human-man interface, sorry, the HMI, the computer interface. And there's got to be a focus on the level of maturity of the implementation, as they're not advanced as Heathrow, but they haven't been doing it as long. So from those two implementations, just some takeaway points. The cultural changes are a significant amount of work. That's clear and evident. IT changes should be easier than the cultural changes, but they can go wrong. And so a hard look at the legacy systems that are there should be done. I mean, having said that, we are in a different world. I mean, the technology is advancing so quickly and becoming easier to deal with, quicker to implement. So I think as each year goes by, it does become easier. Network mode clearly is extremely desirable. Your arrivals turn into your departures. It's a closed loop. But Gatwick is finding their local mode is valuable, and there's changing behavior that has to be enforced, reinforced, and the introduction of those local efficiencies. So the computer platform that's delivering A-CDM data, it is the single version of the truth for the airport. And the TSAT, the target startle approval at time, is really providing a view on how the overall airport is doing. Because as an airline, you can see, well, here's when I'm going to be ready, but here's when I can start. So how are they doing? Over-aggressive implementation plans can be counterproductive. And the steering group, comprising all stakeholders, is necessary to help build the critical mass required for success. So everybody's got to be on board, everybody's got to be, or the vast majority have got to be marching in the same direction for A-CDM to work. And finally, a standards-based approach to integration is best. So I hope that was useful, and I thank you very much for your time. And I wish you all the best and all the luck with A-CDM implementations in the future. Thank you.
Senhores, com a licença do Brigadeiro Domingues, só dois avisos bem rápidos. O primeiro, só para que os senhores tenham ciência, a equipe de tradução recebeu as apresentações, né, e teve alguns briefings antes, justamente por causa dos termos técnicos. Então, a gente sabe que grande parte da audiência domina a língua inglesa, no entanto, às vezes fica um pouco cansativo ou geram algumas dúvidas por causa dos termos utilizados no A-CDM. Por favor, não se acanhem em pegar a tradução lá, que ajuda bastante, tá ok? E o segundo ponto, bem rápido, sobre o aplicativo Slido de perguntas, como foi dito lá no início, a pergunta só abre para votação depois que a mediação do evento autoriza. Então, eu estou falando isso porque a gente, né, é muito bom ter esse feedback, recebemos bastante perguntas lá, só que, por vezes, quando a pergunta não passa para a votação, algumas pessoas estão enviando a pergunta 2 vezes ou 3 vezes. Na verdade, essa pergunta ainda não foi à votação por 2 motivos. Ou porque ela vai ser respondida nas palestras de hoje à tarde, antes do painel, ou nas palestras de amanhã. Tá ok? Então, a gente está fazendo esse filtro exatamente porque essa informação ainda vai ser passada. Se não for passada, a gente libera essa pergunta quando a gente tiver o painel. Tá bom? Nós vamos dar o intervalo agora e retornamos às 14h20 após o almoço. Obrigado.